Police dog refuses to move from the front of the plane. When the pilots find out why, there before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story don't forget to subscribe. Snow gently blanketed the runway of Liberty Heights International Airport on that winter morning. The cold winds swept through the terminals, but the bustling pace of a new day remained undeterred. In the control tower, indicator lights flashed sequentially in preparation for takeoff. Boeing 787, flight number LH-298, was awaiting clearance to taxi. Passengers were seated, the cargo hold secured and all procedures completed. Captain Oliver Hughes checked his watch one last time before issuing the departure command. But at that very moment, the unexpected occurred. Shadow, a specially trained Belgian Malinois 9, suddenly dashed onto the runway, positioning himself directly in front of the aircraft. He stood there, tense, ears perked, eyes fixed intently on the aircraft's underbelly near the cargo hold. Ground staff were alarmed, and the pilots immediately shut down the engines as directed by the control tower. All communication channels echoed the same question. What on earth is happening? Neil Carter, Shadow's handler and security officer, rushed out immediately afterward. "Shadow, stand down," he shouted. But Shadow remained unmoved. He growled softly, his gaze unwavering, as if sensing something concealed beneath the cold metal exterior that only he could detect. Time seemed to freeze. Captain Hughes exited the cockpit, approaching with the ground supervisor to assess the situation. Passengers inside the cabin began to murmur. Among them was Emily Grant, a seasoned investigative journalist. She opened her notebook, her journalistic instincts alerting her. This flight is far from ordinary. Security forces promptly secured the area. Though perplexed, Neil chose to trust Shadow, the partner he'd worked alongside for over 4 years. He turned to the chief officer. "I request a cargo hold inspection." Shadow has never been wrong. A routine inspection was conducted. Inside the hold, they meticulously unloaded each package. Explosive and radiation detectors remained silent. Everything appeared normal, until Shadow suddenly lunged toward a crate resting quietly at the back. He clawed vigorously at its surface, emitting a sharp, insistent bark. Neil knelt down to examine it. Inside, they discovered a casing made of an unfamiliar metallic alloy, reinforced with a compact cooling system. Upon opening the innermost layer, everyone was rendered speechless. A minuscule electronic chip device, equipped with a concealed electronic chip device, antenna and a disguised transmission system. A technician on site exclaimed, "This isn't civilian equipment." Information was relayed to airport management. A federal security team was immediately dispatched. Neil was instructed to maintain absolute silence. However, Emily Grant, who had been quietly observing, had already recorded everything with a hidden camera embedded in her shirt button. Meanwhile, in an office thousands of miles away, Gregory Vail, CCO of the defense technology conglomerate Etherian Dynamics, received an encrypted message. "Shipment detected. 9 unit involved. Codename Shadow." His expression remained impassive. "Eliminate both. Immediately." In the days that followed, Neil and Shadow's lives were completely upended. They were suspended pending investigation, but Neil refused to remain idle. He contacted Emily, and together they embarked on a reverse investigation. From the mysterious package to its manufacturer, from the manufacturer to the distribution network, ultimately uncovering a chilling secret. Etherian had been covertly transporting neural surveillance devices, technology capable of monitoring and manipulating human behavior through brainwaves, disguised within civilian shipments, and Shadow, guided by the purest instincts of a loyal creature, had thwarted it at the final moment. The story became not just about a dog, but about courage, loyalty, and the silent sacrifices made to uphold what is right, even when confronting the darkest forces. From that day forward, he was known by a new title. Shadow, the silent guardian of truth. The alarm blared across the cargo bay of Liberty Heights International Airport. Security officers and the rapid response team swarmed the scene, where 9 Officer Shadow sat motionless, his eyes locked on the freshly unloaded metallic crate. "No one touches it," barked Chief Officer Monroe, his voice sharp. "This area is locked down, until we know exactly what we're dealing with." Shadow stood firmly by his handler, veteran agent Eli Ramsey. The dog's eyes were intense, alert, as if something more dangerous still lurked beneath the surface. Eli crouched beside him, gently patting Shadow's flank while his eyes remained fixed on the team of technicians working on the crate. "What did you see, buddy?" he whispered. "What is it this time?" The container was sealed with a magnetic security system, the kind usually reserved for high-grade military shipments. When it was finally opened, the interior revealed a sleek device the size of a laptop. No markings, no manual, only a strip of LED lights blinking in a steady rhythm. A TSA tech stepped back, visibly shaken. "This doesn't match anything on record." "It doesn't emit electromagnetic signals. No standard power supply. It's practically invisible to every known scanning system." "Then why did Shadow catch it?" Eli asked, his voice low and hoarse. No one had an answer. In the airport's internal security office, Director Amelia Voss rewound surveillance footage, her eyes narrowing. She paused on a figure in a Valence Logistics uniform rolling the crate toward the loading dock. The person wore a low-brim cap and surgical mask, a perfect disguise in the post-pandemic world. "Facial recognition scan," she ordered. Within seconds, the system returned a red notice. "Result: unidentified. No match in employee database." Amelia hit the intercom. "We have a breach. Run all footage between Gate 6 and Cargo Bay 3. And get me the FBI that afternoon." Eli was summoned to a classified briefing with Federal Agent Kendra Morales. Known for handling high-risk tech-related threats, Kendra was a sharp-eyed investigator with little patience for red tape. "Do you know what this device is?" she asked, sliding a high-res printout of the object across the table. Eli shook his head. "Never seen it before." But Shadow detected something. "Chemical? Organic?" "There's no scent signature on record," Kendra replied slowly. "But we think it's a quantum masker, a prototype device meant for undetectable data transmission. More importantly, it emits ultra-low-frequency brainwave signals." Eli froze. "You're saying it affects the human brain?" Kendra nodded. "It was originally developed for PTSD therapy, to modulate trauma responses. But the prototype went missing 4 months ago, and now a duplicate just happens to be packed into a commercial flight's cargo hold." Eli muttered. "Jesus, we believe there's a network smuggling these through major airports," she said. And Shadow just blew their cover. That night, in a dim room behind the 9 training grounds, Eli sat silently with Shadow at his feet. The German shepherd rested his head on Eli's leg, sensing his partner's tension. "You're not just a detection dog anymore, are you?" Eli murmured, running his fingers behind Shadow's ears. "You picked up on something no machine could. And now, they're coming for us." The phone rang. It was Amelia. "We've got another package. Same signature as the one Shadow found. This time it was loaded onto a plane in Miami. Where is it now?" "In the air, en route to Tokyo." Eli stood, breath quickening. "We need to act fast, before someone gets hurt." "There's more," Amelia added. "Shadow might be facing suspension for interfering with civilian flight operations." Eli's blood ran cold. "You can't be serious. He saved lives. That's why I'm calling you." "They need more proof. One discovery isn't enough. They'll say it's coincidence." The next morning, Shadow didn't run drills or sniff through the training yard. He lay quietly near the fence, his amber eyes filled with something close to sorrow. Eli sat beside him, heart heavy. "We'll prove you were right, boy. We'll find out who's behind this." Just then Eli's phone buzzed. A message from Kendra. "Prints on the crate match a missing LTIC defense engineer. Gone 6 months. The dots are connecting." Eli tightened his grip on the phone. He turned to Shadow. "There's still time. And I swear, I won't let them take you." Shadow let out a low growl. Not of fear, but resolve. Above them, aircraft soared across the sky. Some carrying passengers, others cargo. But beneath the roar of engines and daily routines, a conspiracy was unraveling, and at the center of it all wasn't a machine or a drone, but a dog whose loyalty, instincts, and unbreakable bond with his handler had just lit the first spark of truth. In a small cafe tucked behind the cargo terminal of Liberty Heights International Airport, Warm yellow light flickered across the anxious faces of 3 people seated at a corner table. Neil Carter gripped his coffee tightly, his eyes fixed on the entrance. Beside him sat Emily Grant, a seasoned investigative journalist, scribbling in her notebook with the urgency of someone used to chasing breaking stories. Across from them, Captain Oliver Hughes, who had canceled flight LH-298 after Shadow blocked its path, sat with a weary expression. "We've only got a few days before all of this gets buried under bureaucracy," Oliver said grimly. "Once higher up step in, every trace will be scrubbed clean." Neil nodded, voice rough. "Shadow's already been quarantined for safety review, and I'm under internal investigation for failure to follow emergency protocol. They're already labeling us." Emily paused mid-scribble, her eyes flashing like a spark in the dark. "I have an old contact. Used to work in international cargo monitoring. He owes me a favor. I'll find out how shipments like this are being processed after discovery." Neil looked at her, equal parts grateful and concerned. "And this might be more dangerous than any of your previous stories." "Neil, I was threatened after exposing a money laundering network in Asia," she replied calmly. "If I was afraid, I wouldn't still be doing this." Oliver leaned back, exhaling slowly. "So, what's the plan?" While Emily dove into tracking shipping data, Neil returned to the training facility, now a holding area, where Shadow had been confined. The German shepherd stood the moment he heard Neil's footsteps. Despite being in a holding cage, Shadow's eyes were calm and unwavering. "We won't let them separate us," Neil whispered, reaching through the bars to gently touch Shadow's neck. "I saw the way you reacted to that scent. It wasn't just strange. It was a warning." That night, Emily sent Neil an encrypted file. "These are 12 flights from the past 3 months with shipment manifests identical to LH-298, all modified at the last minute." "And who approved them?" Neil asked. "Someone at Skytrace Logistics, but cross-referencing shows they're actually contracted by Novodyne Technologies." Oliver raised an eyebrow at the name. "Novodyne? They specialize in surveillance and tactical drone systems for defense. What are they doing tied to civilian cargo?" Emily met their eyes. "That's exactly what I want to know." 2 days later, under the pretense of an internal audit, Oliver arranged for Neil and Emily to board a special domestic cargo flight overseen by Liberty Heights. Listed as security analysis observers, they gained limited access to the cargo bay. Shadow came with them. In the pale blue lighting, the dog froze before a crate, bearing a manifest similar to the one from LH-298. This time, he didn't growl. He lay down, eyes locked on the top of the crate as if sensing something deeper. "We need to open this," Neil said urgently. A technician shook his head. "We don't have clearance. These containers require dual biometric access. Unless someone from Central Ops signs off." Emily pulled out her phone. "What if someone formerly inside Novodyne just leaked us the first layer decryption key?" She typed quickly. A soft click followed. The crate unlatched. Inside were black, metallic boxes labeled navigation sensors, but beneath the facade they uncovered something strange. A mesh of microcircuits fused with what looked like synthetic biological material. Oliver looked at Neil. "These aren't standard nav components." Then the bay alarm blared. Someone had triggered a remote security lockdown. "They know," Emily said, her face pale. "We've been caught." Neil scooped up Shadow. "Run." In a safe house arranged by a former TSA contact, the trio met again with only a laptop and a secured network link. Emily began uploading the footage from her wearable cam, sending it to a trusted senior editor. "We need to go public," she said. That was a neural influence module, a tech that could remotely manipulate cognition via passive signals hidden in commercial shipments. Oliver crossed his arms, face unreadable. What if the government already knows and lets it pass under the guise of national security? Neil looked down at Shadow lying beside him, his sleek black coat shimmering under the lamp. "Then we need something stronger than government," he said quietly. "We need public trust." Emily looked at the 2 men. One a pilot risking his reputation, the other a handler bound to his partner by loyalty, and the dog who had stood in front of a jetliner to stop danger. She nodded slowly. "We're not just fighting a company. You're not just fighting a company. We're standing up for every person who's never been given a choice." Outside, the rain began to fall. Inside, 3 people, and one extraordinary dog, prepared to unleash a truth that could shake the pillars of global aviation, national security, and humanity's understanding of safety itself. The ones who hide in the shadows that night's rain in Washington, D.C., poured relentlessly, washing away the city's fragile facade of calm. Inside a dim back room of a weathered bookstore in Georgetown, Emily Grant spread out smudged documents across a cracked wooden table. The name Etherian Dynamics stood at the center of a sprawling map of shell companies, investment funds, and seemingly unrelated air cargo routes. Captain Oliver Hughes sat across from her, concern lining his face. I heard whispers about Etherian back in the military. They're the legal version of the dark web. Everything they do has a paper trail, but no one really knows what they're up to. Neil Carter said nothing. He just rested a hand on Shadow, who lay quietly at his feet. The dog's ears perked slightly, as if listening to the tension in the room. Emily lowered her voice. I just got a tip from a friend at the TSA. A new shipment, labeled as transit sensors, just went out under Etherian's name. But based on what little they could discreetly scan, it's the same tech Shadow stopped on flight LH-298. They're still shipping. Neil frowned. After the LH-298 incident got flagged? Who the hell would authorize that? Oliver exhaled. Only someone Vale owns. The name Gregory Vale chilled the room. A reclusive billionaire rarely seen in public, he ran Etherian like a secret society disguised as a defense tech empire. Rumors of his involvement in advanced neurological experiments were once dismissed as conspiracy. Not anymore. Emily pulled a thin folder from her bag. I have a source inside. An engineer who worked on a project called Memo. According to him, these devices can read and emit neural signals. Low-frequency impulses that, in theory, can influence behavior through electromagnetic fields. Wi-Fi, 5A, even LED lighting. Oliver stood abruptly. You're saying Vale is testing cognitive control devices through civilian air cargo? Emily nodded. And Shadow? He's the only threat they didn't account for. He's not fooled by camouflage or digital signatures. Neil clenched his jaw. They're trying to reassign him, move him far from me, isolate him. We can't let that happen, Oliver said. If we have proof, real proof, we take this public. Before Vale buries it all. Emily looked at her watch. My source wants to meet tonight. A quiet bar in Arlington. But only one of us can go. Neil and Oliver exchanged glances. Oliver nodded. I'll stay with Shadow. The bar was called Sable, tucked behind a parking structure where security cameras conveniently didn't work. Emily and Neil entered cautiously. A man waited in a small room at the back, mid-40s, gaunt, with restless eyes that scanned everything behind him. Call me Marcus, he said. I was on the simulation engineering team for Etherian. I quietly pulled a portion of the Memo command code, and I know they're testing it in real-world settings without consent. Passengers? Emily asked grimly. Marcus nodded. They measure post-flight behavior, mood changes, impulse decisions, even spending habits. They're testing behavioral, nudging through ambient neural fields. Neil's skin crawled. Do you have proof? Marcus handed over a tiny USB. This is code chatter between the shipping devices and Etherian's ground servers. If you know neurosignal tech, you'll recognize this isn't standard telemetry. Emily took it. Will you testify? Marcus gave a bitter smile. I'm going dark. After this, I disappear. He vanished into the night like a ghost. Emily and Neil left the bar in silence, hearts pounding. They had the proof. Enough to crack the whole thing wide open. The next morning, Neil arrived at the 9 facility and found Shadow gone. He was transferred early morning. A staffer whispered, High-level clearance. I tried to call, but your line was blocked. Neil's knees weakened. Where? Nevada. Emergency Response Training Center. Emily called Oliver immediately. We move now, she said. If they disappear Shadow into a black site, he's gone forever. I'll call Congresswoman Ward. Oliver replied, She's a civil rights hawk. She can demand protection for specialized service animals under witness security protocols. Emily sent Marcus code to her team of forensic tech analysts. Within an hour, they confirmed, Memo contained active neural manipulation commands. That afternoon, the trio Emily, Neil, and Oliver entered a closed session at Capitol Hill. Congresswoman Ward listened intently. Then she turned to Neil. Shadow saved 239 lives from an invisible weapon. It's our turn to protect him. A federal order was issued. Immediate halt to Shadow's transfer pending investigation into Ethereum dynamics. 2 hours later, Shadow returned to D.C. with a protective escort. Neil knelt beside his partner, hugging him tightly. Shadow leaned in, tail wagging as if he'd never left. Emily turned to Congresswoman Ward. What now? Ward's expression was steely. I am convening a congressional oversight panel. Ethereum has crossed a line. This time, their tech won't silence anyone. Above them, the gray DC sky seemed to brighten slightly, hinting at a coming storm. But this time, they were ready. And at the heart of it all, stood a dog named Shadow, who would not back down. The silent ones in the storm. Spring rain fell steadily over Washington, D.C., like the quiet sobs of a city trying to bury a secret too heavy to hold. Inside a modest apartment in Foggy Bottom, Neil Carter stood still by the window, the amber streetlights reflecting in his tired eyes. Shadow lay at his feet, unmoving, but his ears stayed perked, alert to every faint sound. Since returning from the illegal cargo interception, Shadow hadn't slept deeply. Neither had Neil. We've touched something they'll do anything to keep hidden, Neil murmured, reaching down to stroke the dog's back. But I swear they won't tear us apart again. The closed-door meeting at Congress should have been a turning point. Instead, it triggered a quiet storm. 3 days later, Congresswoman Ward was temporarily reassigned to a different committee. Her office was swept by an independent audit team, investigative reporter Emily Grant. Her expose was rejected by her paper due to lack of verifiable sources. Her laptop was hacked. A midnight call warned her. Stop for your own good! Captain Oliver Hughes was grounded indefinitely. No explanation. National security, the airline said, offering no further detail. We're fighting a beast with many heads, Emily said, seated in Neil's apartment, eyes dark with exhaustion, and each head wears a tie and sits on a board. Gregory Vale, the power behind Ethereum dynamics, was anything but silent. Within days, he launched a campaign titled National Neurosecurity Initiative, flanked by retired generals, smiling senators, and eager media personalities. I'm saddened that some have misunderstood our technology, Vale declared at a press conference, eyes locked on the camera. We don't manipulate the brain, we protect it. Emily watched the replay. Her laugh sharp. He doesn't need to silence anyone with force. He has the news cycle. And the government? Neil asked, jaw tight, silent. No one from Homeland Security dares comment since Ward got reassigned. The silence in the room was deafening. But sometimes, in silence, hope is born. At a quiet diner in Bethesda, a man in his 50s sat alone, watching the door. When Neil entered, the man nodded once. Thomas Yates used to work with signals intelligence. Officially retired, unofficially watching. Neil said nothing. They called it Project Nemo before it had a real name, Yates continued. Started as a joint effort between the CIA and a startup. It was shelved after it crossed ethical boundaries. Someone salvaged the tech, sold it to Ethereum. Gregory Vale, Neil said flatly. Yates nodded. He didn't invent the snake. He just knew how to feed it with government contracts. And you want to help? Not for you. Because I let this thing grow. Yates slid a hard drive across the table. Internal logs. Ethereum's coordination with offshore intel satellites. You'll need a code breaker. Neil stared at the drive. I know someone. 2 days later, in the basement of an old library in Alexandria, Emily reconnected with Clara Moreno, a former NSA cryptographer who'd resigned after learning her algorithms were repurposed for mass surveillance. It's been a while, Emily, Clara said with a sad smile. We need your skills. This is dangerous. Clara plugged in the drive. Lines of encrypted files rolled across the screen. For her, it was like solving a jigsaw puzzle. After 3 hours, she looked up. This is a map. Locations. Flight routes. Timelines. They're running Nemo pilot programs at 14 commercial airports. Not just here. Europe, Asia, South America. Emily went pale. It's not just a domestic operation. No, Clara said. It's global. And Shadow's the only variable they didn't account for. That night, Neil got a text. Cancel all plans. Shadow will be reassigned at 7 a.m. tomorrow. Behavior review failed. No, Neil whispered, kneeling by his partner. Not again. Emily called Clara. We go public. Tonight. They'll never print it. Then we go where they can't censor us. A video went live at 12:03 a.m. It showed Shadow stopping flight H298. Nemo code screenshots. Simulations of neural manipulation. Emily's voice spoke clearly at the end. If a dog can detect what billions in tech cannot, maybe we should ask, who does our technology really serve? The video exploded across the internet. Hashtags like #TruthUnleashed, #ShadowKnows, and #MemoProject went viral within 6 hours. By morning, the Department of Justice called for an emergency inquiry. A congressional hearing was scheduled. For the first time in history, a dog, Shadow, was listed as a non-human witness. Gregory Vale arrived with his lawyers, but this time, the tide had turned. When Clara displayed the memo tracking network on a massive screen, the room fell silent. And then, an older congressman whispered, "And a dog uncovered this before any of us." That evening, back home, Neil removed the training collar from Shadow's neck and replaced it with a new tag that read, "Guardian of Truth." Shadow turned, eyes bright. No bark needed. He'd already said everything that mattered. And the real fight was just beginning. A soft spring rain tapped against the tin roof of an old research building on the outskirts of Richmond. Inside a second-floor room that smelled of old paper and lingering chemicals, Dr. Martin Elridge sat across from investigative journalist Emily Grant, his trembling hands resting on a weathered cloth-bound folder. "This," he said in a hoarse voice, "is the original design, stolen, twisted, and turned into something I never agreed to." Neil Carter stood beside Shadow, eyes fixed on the gray-haired scientist, reading not just the man's face, but the gravity of every word. Shadow, usually on alert, now lay silently at Neil's feet, eyes fixed on Elridge as if he too understood what was unfolding. "How long did you work for Etherian?" Emily asked. 9 years, Elridge replied. 9 years developing nonlinear reflective composites, materials designed to bend electromagnetic waves and hide sensitive equipment. I built it for protecting medical tech in war zones. But by year 6, everything changed. He opened the folder, pulling out a meticulously drawn schematic of a small cube-like device, annotated in sharp handwriting. Prototype E9EA. Active cloaking unit. Commercial signal camouflage. What Shadow detected, Elridge said, looking up, eyes hollow with guilt, was a fully operational version of this model. A surveillance system I never thought would be realized. Neil lowered himself into a chair, quiet. What exactly can this device do? Elridge inhaled slowly. It doesn't just avoid detection, it pretends. If it's packed with 20 boxes of off-the-shelf security cameras, it emits signals making it appear identical to them. Scanners, X-rays, it mimics density and shape to fool every known system. And only Shadow caught the scent, Emily murmured. Elridge nodded. These materials still release trace organic compounds, imperceptible to humans, but not to a dog like Shadow. That's why he refused to move. That night, Emily published an anonymous piece on a decentralized press network. She titled it, "Blueprints of Conscience, the Whistleblower Behind the Invisible Eye." It spread fast. While not admissible in court, the story planted seeds of doubt among the public, whispers about technology that could cloak itself even from truth. The next day, a quiet message reached Emily from the Office of Digital Fraud Oversight. "We've heard rumors of such systems for years. One engineer committed suicide. Files sealed. Your article unlocked some old doors. At Liberty Heights, Neil was called to hand over Shadow. Orders from above, they said. Temporary reassignment for psychological evaluation of 9 units. Neil knelt, wrapping his arms around the dog. "Don't worry," he whispered. "We won't be apart for long." But that night, Neil didn't go home. Instead, he drove straight to Clara Moreno, a decoding expert who had once helped Emily crack a defense contractor's archive. "I need to unlock these files," he said, sliding her the encrypted drive Dr. Elridge had entrusted to him. Clara studied him, then nodded. "And I need this to trace it properly." She held up a device, an electronic scent analyzer embedded with the unique odor signature Shadow had been trained to detect. "Shadow's brain," she smiled faintly, "is now part of our algorithm." 2 days later, they broke through. Inside were shipping routes, destination codes, device serials, and a name: Sentinel-X Neuro-Networked Domestic Monitoring System. Clara sent the findings to Congress Oversight Committee. The next morning, the airport director was suspended. Summons were issued to Ethereum. Journalists started asking questions once silenced by NDAs and red tape. Gregory Vale went on live television, his face unreadable. "This is a smear campaign," he said. "Our technology is certified and secure." But this time, few were convinced. Elsewhere, at a private military facility, Shadow, now isolated, began showing signs of distress when a new crate arrived at the evaluation center. Report: the dog refuses food, growling non-stop at crate #9. A junior officer quietly messaged Neil. "The dog knows." Neil didn't hesitate. He called Emily and Clara. "We need to get him out, tonight." The plan was precise. With help from a covert TSA contact, an old army buddy of Neil's, they staged a false internal audit. Emily posed as a courier. Clara hacked into the facility's door controls. After nearly 10 hours of tension, Shadow was freed. As the rear exit opened, the dog sprinted forward, sensing freedom, tail low, ears up, heading straight into Neil's arms. No barking, just a trembling, silent reunion. That evening, Emily went public. She appeared on national television with the files, the proof, and Clara's scent-based algorithm. Dr. Elridge provided a recorded confession, outlining how his invention had been hijacked for surveillance. Then came Shadow, stoic, intelligent, and somehow more human than half the people watching. In a world obsessed with advanced tech, what ultimately exposed the truth wasn't a drone, or an algorithm, or a sensor array. It was a dog's nose. Shadow never spoke, but his actions roared through the silence. The truth cannot hide from those who can smell it. The meeting room sat deep in the sub-basement level, sea of a government building with no nameplate, gray concrete walls, silent cameras, and rows of flickering fluorescent lights made the space feel suspended between past and present. No one in the independent task force imagined their counterstrike would begin in such a place. Emily Grant sat near the one-way observation glass, studying the people entering: 2 senior FBI agents, an officer from the Aviation Security Agency, and Congresswoman Nora Lansing, rarely seen in public, but the only one brave enough to sign off on this emergency briefing. "We've got 3 hours before Ethereum's press conference, where they plan to roll out a sanitized version of their scanner program, under the guise of urgent national security upgrades." Nora said, her voice low but firm. "If we want to flip the narrative, it has to happen now." Neil Carter reached down and gently tapped the back of Shadow, the loyal 9 sitting silently at his side. As if sensing the tension in the room, Shadow didn't bark or whine, only stared with alert eyes at the maps, documents, and screens projected on the wall. Captain Oliver Hughes, pilot of Flight AH-298, the one Shadow had stopped, placed a thick folder on the table. "This is the internal flight log I pulled from a backup server, one Ethereum thought no one knew about. It proves that disguised shipments have moved through at least 14 civilian airports in the past 2 months. An ASA officer nodded gravely. "What's more disturbing is the old scanners actually flagged some of these cargo anomalies, but were rendered ineffective by firmware updates provided by Ethereum themselves." Emily tapped her tablet and cast a video onto the main screen. It had no date stamp or audio enhancement, just the chilling voice of Gregory Vale during a private shareholder meeting, secretly recorded and decrypted with help from a whistleblower named Clara. "We don't sell devices, we sell invisibility," Vale said, his eyes ice cold. "And nothing sells better than fear, especially when it's wrapped in the promise of security." No one spoke. The video ended with scattered applause, not from the public, but from Ethereum's own boardroom. "He's not just selling tech," Emily whispered. "He's selling permanent camouflage. To anyone who can pay, no matter their motives." The plan was codenamed Operation Dawnlight, a quiet push to expose the darkness before the new day began. The FBI would raid Ethereum's Houston data facility, housing contracts, transport logs, and unencrypted internal memos. ASA would freeze operations at 3 major airports flagged as hot zones. And Nora Lansing, wielding rare congressional oversight powers, would call for an emergency public hearing at sunrise, subpoenaing Vail and his inner circle. The hardest part, delivering the evidence at just the right moment, before Ethereum could scrub its tracks, destroy proof, or deploy their scanners nationwide. "We're bringing Shadow with us," Neil announced, heads turned. "This dog is our living witness, and indisputable proof their technology failed to detect what nature still can." No one ignores the testimony of a 4-legged hero, Nora smiled. In the damp chill of an abandoned airstrip in rural Virginia, chosen as staging ground for dawnlight, black-clad teams gathered. Unmarked vehicles murmured commands, clicks of gear and encrypted comms. Shadow wore a light tactical vest, fitted with a mini-camera and biometric sensors. ASA engineers had modified the setup to track his reactions to hidden materials in real time. "He doesn't need words," Emily said softly, as she watched Shadow board the van. "He just needs trust. And this time, the country's going to hear him loud and clear." 3:37 a.m. Houston, Texas. At Ethereum's data bunker, the warrant was electronically signed and delivered to the FBI team leader. The steel gate groaned open. No gunfire. Just the soft grind of rubber on concrete. 3 floors underground, in a corridor not on any blueprints, Shadow suddenly froze. His posture tense, eyes locked on a blank wall. Neil crouched beside him. "What is it, boy, then?" One bark. Short, sharp. A thermal sensor scanned the area, and the wall lit up. A hidden door. When it was cut open, they found a secret chamber, filled with paper records, external drives, and prototype tech. The ghost of a complete surveillance ecosystem, tucked away, waiting to disappear. "We have everything," the FBI agent murmured. "Shadow, you just saved us again." 7:25 a.m. Capitol Hill. The emergency hearing was underway. Nora Lansing opened with a now viral clip of Shadow barking at the hidden chamber. "They say dogs can't talk." But this one recognized a lie when he saw it. Gregory Vail sat ghost-white as the next clip rolled. His own voice, recorded months earlier, retrieved from the very room Shadow uncovered. Nora then announced the immediate suspension of Ethereum's scanner rollout pending federal investigation. An ASA officer in the audience quietly wept. Neil said nothing, only reached down to stroke Shadow's back, who lay peacefully beneath the witness bench, his job done. 6 months later, at the main atrium of Liberty Heights International, a new bronze plaque had been mounted, in honor of Shadow, the 9 who saw what technology could not, for loyalty that asked for no reward, for courage that needed no applause. Emily Grant received a Pulitzer. Oliver Hughes returned to the skies. Neil, now senior security advisor to civil aviation, still walked Shadow every morning. But something in Shadow's eyes had changed. A peace that only comes after facing true darkness. He hadn't barked to be noticed. He barked because he knew we needed to be protected. And we listened, just in time. Autumn had settled over Liberty Heights International Airport, like an old blanket draped gently across the busy tarmac. Fallen leaves scattered near the boarding gates, yet inside Neil Carter, veteran canine handler to Shadow, a feeling stirred, difficult to name. It wasn't relief, and it wasn't victory. Everyone thought it was over, that exposing Ethereum and suspending Gregory Vail had closed a dark chapter. But Neil knew better. Evil doesn't vanish. It just learns how to breathe differently. Early morning, while Shadow kept his usual quiet vigil by the window, Neil received a call from Emily Grant, former investigative journalist, now media security advisor for the Department of Transportation. "Neil, you need to see this." Her voice was low, steady. "A package from Maple Point Airport was flagged by local police yesterday. The strange part, it carries an old Ethereum standard tag." Neil frowned. "That's impossible. Their logistics system was dismantled nationwide." "Unless someone isn't using the system," Emily replied. "They're using people." She sent a photo. A pure white suitcase. No logos, no seams, no scent. But what stunned Neil wasn't the suitcase itself. It was the tiny QR code on the underside. the kind embedded with subsonic frequencies only specially trained dogs like Shadow could detect. Neil and Shadow boarded a flight to Maple Point, a small airport in rural Montana, known more for its peace than any strategic relevance. There, they met a gaunt, trembling man who identified himself as the last courier of a network even he didn't fully understand. "I was paid in cash, told to deliver the suitcase to a secured gate, not to ask questions," he whispered, avoiding eye contact. But the airport's dog, it knew, wouldn't stop barking until security intervened. Neil looked down at Shadow and saw a shift in his eyes. It wasn't just instinct. It was memory. Initial scans showed the suitcase held no explosives, no functioning electronics. Yet Shadow refused to leave its side. He even barked sharply when a technician tried to touch it. Only under ultraviolet light, combined with Aza's newly developed acoustic scanning, did the truth appear. Embedded within the lining was a film thinner than human skin, carrying encrypted bioneural data, recorded nerve signals from Ethereum's earlier experiments. One of the neural patterns matched the medical file of a 7-year-old child who went missing in Georgia back in 2022. Emily's voice cracked. They weren't just moving tech. They were moving memories. The Maple Point suitcase was just the beginning. Over the following days, 3 more identical white cases surfaced at regional airports. None carried weapons, but each one contained neural impact strings, encoded data designed to interact with human nervous systems through subdermal wireless implants. Neil recalled the words of Dr. Elridge, the ex-Ethereum scientist who had first blown the whistle. "Once you can store sensations, memories, and fear as data, freedom becomes obsolete," which meant, though the official network was dismantled, the underground branches still thrived, and someone was continuing the program in the shadows. One night, returning from a meeting in D.C., Neil found Shadow pawing at the storage shed door, the one where relics from his earliest 9 unit were kept. Shadow had never shown interest in those artifacts. Until now, beneath a silver tarp, Shadow unearthed a small device, long deactivated since 2021. It was a hypersensitive sensor used during Ethereum's reflex training trials. Shadow had worn it during one of the experimental phases. Neil remembered. The dog picked it up, brought it to Neil's hand, then sat down, his eyes dim and far away. Not from pain, from recognition. He remembered. Neil tightened his grip around the device, a chill settling in his gut. "You're telling me the rest of the program is still running?" Shadow gave a low, quiet whine. It was all the confirmation Neil needed. Gregory Vale had been suspended, but he was still a billionaire. And men like him never bet on a single hand. Emily uncovered documents linking Vale to a transfer of shares into a shell fund based in Iceland, where biodata regulations were notoriously weak. A new corporation named Neurogrid, under the name of Vale's ex-wife, had just filed for approval to begin neural-linked memory trials across Europe. It wasn't just a new company. It was the old program, rebranded and reborn. The U.S. government was split. Some believed Europe should handle its own mess. Others, led by Senator Nora Lansing, pushed for a global inquiry. But for Neil, the harder question wasn't political. It was personal. Could Shadow keep going? He was aging, still alert, still proud. But Neil noticed the wear each day, the stiffness in the legs, the deeper breaths after long walks. And now a new mission loomed, across the Atlantic. More brutal, more tangled. One evening, Neil knelt beside him. "Do you want to retire?" Shadow didn't answer, just sat beside him on the porch, watching the last light fade. But the next morning, when Neil opened the door, Shadow was waiting, harness in mouth. As the military transport lifted off eastward, carrying Neil and Shadow toward Europe, Neil looked back at Liberty Heights Airport one last time. The story everyone thought had ended was beginning again. Because in a world where technology fights to erase every trace of truth, it's memory and loyalty that remain beyond replication. Shadow wasn't just the dog who stopped a plane. He was a symbol, a warning bell, and the living memory of everything humanity is trying to forget. The National Honor Ceremony was held at the National Security Memorial in Arlington. The soft autumn sunlight fell across the white stone courtyard, reflecting off the polished memorial walls, where the names of unsung heroes were etched in silence. Rows of dignitaries, officers and civilians, stood still as the flags were lowered, and a military band played a somber rendition of America the Beautiful. Emily Grant stood among them, her award for national journalism still heavy in her hand, but her eyes were searching the crowd for someone else. Oliver Hughes, now officially recognized as a civilian hero, stood next to her in full pilot uniform, his metal gleaming, but his gaze, too, was distant. Something about the spotlight, the applause, the standing ovation, it all felt like an epilogue that didn't quite match the story they had just lived. Near the back of the stage, Neil Carter sat quietly beside his companion, Shadow. The old nine wore a simple service vest bearing the words, "Retired, but forever ready." The dog's head remained high, ears alert. Even among generals and senators, it was Shadow who commanded the most reverence. When Neil and Shadow were called to the front, the crowd rose as one. For unwavering service, for intelligence beyond protocol, for a loyalty no machine could ever replace, the master of ceremonies said, "This is not just a dog. This is a reminder, to all of us, that conscience still has a heartbeat." But even as the applause thundered and cameras flashed, Neil's heart remained heavy. He could feel Shadow's breathing beside him, steady but slower than it used to be. Time was a predator that didn't negotiate. After the ceremony, when most of the crowd had dispersed, a quiet figure approached Neil in the garden behind the memorial. It was Nora Lansing. "You look like a man with unfinished business," she said gently. Neil gave a weary smile. "I feel like one too." Nora sat on the bench beside him. "There's talk of forming an international task force," she said, "based in Geneva. Joint surveillance and counterintelligence unit specializing in biological signal threats. We're going to need people who've seen what you've seen." Neil looked down at Shadow, who was lying at his feet, tail twitching gently in the grass. "I don't know if he can take another battle," Neil murmured. "Then maybe you shouldn't call it a battle," Nora replied. "Maybe it's time for a school." He raised an eyebrow. "A 9 intelligence academy," she continued. "You and Shadow, training the next generation, not just dogs but their handlers too. Teaching them to listen not just with commands, but with trust." Neil didn't respond right away. A breeze passed through the garden, scattering golden leaves around them. Shadow lifted his head slightly, watching the wind. For the first time in weeks, Neil felt something lift inside him. Not hope exactly, but direction. 6 months later, on a quiet patch of land in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley, the first phase of the 9 Intelligence and Trust Academy, unofficially called Memory Hill, opened its gates. The campus was unlike anything that had existed before. There were no cages, no shock collars, no harsh drills. Instead, the facility used a partnership model, building a communication system between handlers and dogs rooted in emotional resonance, not just discipline. Shadow, though now officially retired from active duty, became the living heart of the school. Young handlers came from across the country. Some veterans, some survivors of trauma, all drawn to the silent wisdom of the old dog with silver in his muzzle. One boy in particular, Leo, 14 years old, the son of a fallen firefighter, formed a remarkable bond with Shadow. The dog, who rarely responded to strangers anymore, lay beside the boy during every exercise, mirroring his stillness, grounding his shaking hands with the calm of pure presence. When Leo had his first panic attack during night drills, it wasn't a therapist or a peer who helped him. It was Shadow, placing his paw gently on the boy's chest until his breath slowed. Neil watched it all unfold from the control room, hands folded over his chest. "You think he knows what he's doing?" asked Emily, who'd flown in for a visit. Neil smiled. "I think he always has, but peace never lasts forever." One crisp evening, as Neil walked the perimeter trail with Shadow, an alert pinged on his phone. Encrypted. From a source listed only as WhisperNote 7. Neil hesitated, then opened it. Neurogrid has resurfaced. A test node activated outside Warsaw. The signal architecture matches the Montana trace. Memory transfer confirmed. Recipient: child, age 6. Upload incomplete. Neil stopped walking. "Shadow, though stiff in his joints, rose beside him. Emily arrived at the academy 2 days later. "I thought they'd wait longer," she said grimly, unfolding satellite images. "But they're accelerating." Neil looked across the field, where Leo and another young handler were training a German Shepherd pup. "We can't stop this alone," he said. "No," Emily agreed. "But maybe we don't have to anymore." The task force was formed within weeks. Interpol, EU intelligence, even allies in East Asia joined. But the core team, the one that would head to Warsaw first, remained Neil, Emily, and one younger handler from Memory Hill. Leo. At first, Neil resisted. "He's just a kid." But Leo stood tall. So was I when Shadow found me. In the final days before departure, Neil sat with Shadow beneath the apple tree that marked the edge of the academy's grounds. The air was cold, crisp, the smell of earth and dog fur mixed in the wind. "You've given more than your share," Neil whispered, hand resting on Shadow's back. The dog didn't move, just lay there, eyes half closed, breathing steady. "You don't have to go this time," Neil said. But the next morning, when the van to the airfield pulled up, Shadow was already waiting by the gate, Leo's hand gently resting on his collar. What cannot be replicated in a world where memory could be harvested and sold, where technology blurred the line between thought and code. It was an old dog with tired eyes who reminded them all what could never be replicated. Loyalty, instinct, and the sacred trust between those who dare to listen, not just to commands, but to silence. Shadow may not live forever, but his legacy, now running through every corridor of Memory Hill and every footstep Leo takes, will outlast even the most advanced algorithm. Because in the end, it wasn't the machine that saved us. It was the heart that refused to forget. Where the light never fades, a light rain had just fallen over the northern hills of Liberty Heights, as Neil Carter stood beside the stone slab, engraved with the names of 9s who had served the nation. Next to him was Shadow, now with silver dusting his muzzle, yet his eyes still held that same spark, sharp, understanding, and proud. The ceremony had ended long ago. The crowd had thinned, flags folded neatly behind glass, but Neil knew. The true meaning of what they'd done wasn't in the speeches nor the medals. It lived here, in the quiet stories that would echo in the hearts of those who'd witnessed them. Weeks after the honor ceremony, Neil received an unmarked envelope. Inside was a blurred photo. A young boy standing beside a dog that looked eerily like Shadow. On the back, a single line was written. "It saved my child in Budapest." It looked into my eyes, like it knew exactly who I was. No name, no return address. But Neil understood. While the media buzzed about awards and accolades, another part of the war was still unfolding, in silence. Emily, now a special advisor to a nonprofit, informed Neil of a quietly formed international alliance. A group made up of retired security officers, dissenting scientists, and animal behaviorists had built something called the Lumen Circle. Their mission wasn't public investigations. It was humanitarian intervention. Rescuing children used as biosamples, stopping the abuse of neurological tech, and preserving memory before it could be copied or erased. At the center of it all stood a symbol: Shadow, the dog who had once stopped a plane. At a school in Sweden, a girl named Lara, once a victim of the neural surveillance program, wrote an essay about a black dog with eyes that spoke. She had never been to America, but leaked images from the Liberty Heights incident had inspired her across oceans. Her essay won the International Youth Literary Award, but more importantly, it struck a chord no AI could ever replicate. I don't remember all of my past, but I remember the dog's eyes. It didn't fear my memories. It accepted them, and because of that, I learned to accept myself. Neil read her words under the dim kitchen light of his old home. He didn't speak. He just reached down and patted Shadow's head. A story that crossed borders, languages, and even the boundaries of technology. Ethereum had fallen, but the ideas it sowed still lingered. The world wasn't safe, not yet. But Neil believed people were waking up. Not because of grand speeches, but because of a simple truth. Machines could never replace loyalty, and technology could never imitate empathy. While powerful organizations used fear to control, it was compassion, from a retired airport dog, an old soldier, a determined journalist, that became the strongest weapon. One winter morning, snow blanketed the porch steps. Neil opened the door like he always did. But Shadow wasn't in his usual corner. Worried, Neil called out. A soft scratching came from outside. Shadow stood there, but not alone. Beside him was a trembling gray pup, clearly abandoned. Around the pup's neck was a handwritten note. If anyone can teach it what trust means, is you. Neil knelt, wrapping his arms around them both. Shadow looked up at him, then gently licked the pup's head. This wasn't an ending. It was a continuation. In the years that followed, Shadow's story became part of an advanced 9 training curriculum, not just about technique, but about nonverbal empathy. A new center was built next to Liberty Heights Airport. Its name, Shadow Haven, Center for the Recovery of Human and Animal Memory. There, wounded dogs, trauma-affected children, and survivors of technological abuse came together, connecting, healing, and learning to live again. No machines, no code, just trust. On his final day, when Shadow could no longer stand, Neil carried him to the hill behind their home. The two lay together, like retired soldiers. You know, Neil whispered, we didn't save the world, but you saved the most precious thing of all, the human heart. Shadow didn't whimper. He simply closed his eyes. And in that moment, Neil saw no darkness, only light. As if from the earth itself, Shadow's memories rose like rays of sun, spreading across a world that still desperately needed them. On the stone wall at Shadow Haven, a single inscription reads, in an age where memory can be manipulated, loyalty remains the one light that never fades. The story of the 9 who stopped a plane is no longer just history. It's a reminder that even in a high-tech world, what makes us human is feeling. And sometimes, the survival of humanity begins with the eyes of a dog who knows what's right. The story of Shadow, the 9-unit dog at Liberty Heights Airport, stands not only as a moving tale of heroism, but also as a powerful mirror reflecting the reality of our lives. Shadow didn't just save a flight or foil a high-tech conspiracy. He awakened a core question in each of us. Do we still dare to trust instinct, loyalty, and truth in a world increasingly driven by algorithms and deceit? Shadow's story reminds us that not every advanced device or sophisticated security system can replace human intuition or the instincts of beings we often consider wordless. In a society where fake news, manipulated perceptions, and information control have become commonplace, the most vital thing we must hold on to is integrity and awareness. Just as Shadow defied orders to block the runway, sometimes the right thing isn't obedience, but the courage to step outside the lines when something feels wrong. Neil, the man who trained Shadow, embodies those quiet, dedicated souls who work in the shadows, not for glory, but because their conscience won't let them do otherwise. In today's world, each of us can be a Neil, faced with difficult choices between silence and speaking out, between acceptance and resistance. And it is in those brave moments that our humanity is defined. The story also shows us that evil never disappears. It simply changes form. After Ethereum, there may be Neurogrid. After one Gregory Vale, there could always be another. But like Shadow, a dog who seemed so ordinary, who rose to become a symbol of resistance in our own lives, every brave act and every person who holds on to conscience and wisdom can be a light in the darkness. And the final lesson is this: wisdom may come from humans, but loyalty, moral instinct, and the ability to sense the truth can sometimes be found in the humblest of places, like the eyes of a dog. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.